Welcome. Today we will read lesson 173 in the workbook and from the text, chapter 15, section 7, the needless sacrifice, paragraphs 6 through 14. And now for lesson 173. God is but love, and therefore so am I. (155) I will step back and let him lead the way. God is but love, and therefore so am I. (156) I walk with God in perfect holiness. God is but love, and therefore so am I. In the letting go of past thoughts and personal fantasies, does one hear a gentle voice to guide one along one's path? Its wise teachings offering peace to those who cannot distinguish between illusions and the truth. And a fresh way of seeing emerges that has been cleansed of both guilt and fear. And through the recognition that the past did but blind oneself, does one welcome the loveliness and innocence of everything that is encountered in the present now. And having released judgment, is one's own holiness revealed through the peaceful smiles and joyful ways of everyone. And in this is one's unity with one's own source recognized at last. And for our text reading for today, chapter 15, section 7, the needless sacrifice, paragraphs 6 through 14. In one way or another, every relationship the ego makes is based on the idea that by sacrificing itself, it becomes bigger. The sacrifice, which it regards as purification, is actually the root of its bitter resentment. For it would prefer to attack directly and avoid delaying what it really wants. Yet the ego acknowledges reality as it sees it and recognizes that no one could interpret direct attack as love. Yet to make guilty is direct attack, although it does not seem to be. For the guilty expect attack, and having asked for it, they are attracted to it. In such insane relationships, the attraction of what you do not want seems to be much stronger than the attraction of what you do want. For each one thinks that he has sacrificed something to the other and hates him for it. Yet this is what he thinks he wants. He is not in love with the other at all. He merely believes he is in love with sacrifice. And for this sacrifice, which he demands of himself, he demands that the other accept the guilt and sacrifice himself as well. Forgiveness becomes impossible, for the ego believes that to forgive another is to lose him. It is only by attack without forgiveness that the ego can ensure the guilt that holds all its relationships together. Yet they only seem to be together. For relationships to the ego mean only that bodies are together. It is always this that the ego demands. And it does not object where the mind goes or what it thinks, for this seems unimportant. As long as the body is there to receive its sacrifice, it is content. To the ego, the mind is private, and only the body can be shared. Ideas are basically of no concern, except as they bring the body of another closer or farther. And it is in these terms that it evaluates ideas as good or bad. What makes another guilty and holds him through guilt is good. What releases him from guilt is bad, because he would no longer believe that bodies communicate, and so he would be gone. Suffering and sacrifice are the gifts with which the ego would bless all unions. And those who are united at its altar accepts suffering and sacrifice as the price of union. In their angry alliances, born of the fear of loneliness, and yet dedicated to the continuance of loneliness, each seeks relief from guilt by increasing it in the other. For each believes that this decreases guilt in him. The other seems always to be attacking and wounding him, perhaps in little ways, perhaps unconsciously, yet never without demand of sacrifice. The fury of those joined at the ego's altar far exceeds your awareness of it. For what the ego really wants, you do not realize. Whenever you are angry, you can be sure that you have formed a special relationship which the ego has blessed, for anger is its blessing. Anger takes many forms, but it cannot long deceive those who will learn that love brings no guilt at all. And what brings guilt cannot be love and must be anger. All anger is nothing more than an attempt to make someone feel guilty. And this attempt is the only basis the ego accepts for special relationships. Guilt is the only need the ego has, and as long as you identify with it, guilt will remain attractive to you. Yet remember this: to be with a body is not communication. And if you think it is, you will feel guilty about communication and will be afraid to hear the Holy Spirit, recognizing in his voice your own need to communicate. The Holy Spirit cannot teach through fear. And how can he communicate with you while you believe that to communicate is to make yourself alone? It is clearly insane to believe that by communicating you will be abandoned. And yet many do believe it, for they think their minds must be kept private, or they will lose them. But if their bodies are together, their minds remain their own. The union of bodies, thus, becomes the way in which they would keep minds apart. For bodies cannot forgive. They can only do as the mind directs. The illusion of the autonomy of the body and its ability to overcome loneliness is but the working of the ego's plan to establish its own autonomy. As long as you believe that to be with a body is companionship, you will be compelled to attempt to keep your brother in his body, held there by guilt. And you will see safety in guilt and danger in communication. For the ego will always teach that loneliness is solved by guilt, and that communication is the cause of loneliness. And despite the evident insanity of this lesson, many have learned it. Forgiveness lies in communication as surely as damnation lies in guilt. It is the Holy Spirit's teaching function to instruct those who believe communication to be damnation that communication is salvation. And he will do so, for the power of God in him and you is joined in a real relationship, so holy and so strong that it can overcome even this without fear. It is through the holy instant that what seems impossible is accomplished, making it evident that it is not impossible. In the holy instant, guilt holds no attraction, since communication has been restored. And guilt, whose only purpose is to disrupt communication, has no function here. Here there is no concealment and no private thoughts. The willingness to communicate attracts communication to it and overcomes loneliness completely. There is complete forgiveness here, for there is no desire to exclude anyone from your completion. In sudden recognition of the value of his part in it. In the protection of your wholeness, all are invited and made welcome. And you understand that your completion is God's, whose only need is to have you be complete. For your completion makes you his in your awareness. And here it is that you experience yourself as you were created and as you are. The ego believes that by sacrificing itself, it increases itself, making itself larger. In its special relationships, sacrifice is used to make the other feel guilty, and then demanding them to sacrifice themselves. The ego believes it can relieve itself of guilt by increasing it in others. And anger is expressed for the sole purpose of making the other feel guilty. For the ego, a relationship means two bodies in close proximity to each other. Yet the Holy Spirit teaches that only minds can join, and communication is the joining of minds. It is in the holy instant that communication is restored. As one is absent of all private thoughts and concealment, which only block communication. And in this complete forgiveness, where no exclusions can occur, does one experience oneself at last as one was created to be.